The Emperor's Blades by Brian Staveley. Guys, this is going to be an interesting review. I have so much to say. It might be rambly, it could be a little bit ranty, so bear with me, but I have so many things to say about this book. It will be spoiler free if I can manage to keep my thoughts that restrained, and hopefully you will find it useful if you're deciding whether or not to pick up this book. So, The Emperor's Blades is book 1 in the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne trilogy by Brian Staveley, and it is a debut novel, and you can tell. The very short synopsis of this book is that we are following the 3 children of an emperor who are scattered across the continent, across the empire, and they discover that their father has been killed. Adair is the daughter, and she is the Minister of Finance. She is in and around the area of the capital when her father is killed. Caden is the eldest brother who is out in a monastery with a bunch of reclusive monks training, and he has been out there for about 8 years at this point, and he is now the de facto emperor. And then Valin, who is his younger brother, who is part of the Ketteril. It is an elite group of soldiers who are based in the Eyrie. The Ketteril are named after these giant eagle-like creatures which they ride and use in battle and for missions, and he is still training to become a Ketteril at this point at the beginning of this story. We follow the 3 of them as they continue in their lives, some of them knowing about their father's death immediately, some of them not discovering about it immediately and not straight away, and we get to see how they develop and how they react and how they respond in their daily lives. So what I want to say, guys, is that the ideas here are good. The ideas that Brian Staveley has, especially for the world building, are really interesting. But the way they are delivered, the way they are executed, does not do them justice. It is heavy-handed, and there are huge sections that feel just like info dumps at the start of this book. They don't feel like well-crafted, subtle things that we're picking up on, but they just feel like, here, boom, wall of information about the world. And it is an interesting world, so I wish that we got it delivered in a more interesting way. The prose, particularly at the beginning, is clunky, it is repetitive, and it is certainly lacking in subtlety. It will often tell us things that we could have inferred. It sort of treats us like we're not very clever, or we're not really paying attention, like maybe we're only picking up 50% of what Brian Staveley's putting down, whereas actually if you're following well and you know what's going on and you're paying attention, it is a bit repetitive, telling us stuff that we could have inferred from the text anyway. And then there's the plot. The plot for the first 20 chapters is pretty glacial. We're mainly following Caden and Valin. Adair has the most interesting plot, or should have the most interesting plot, but we never see her. We barely ever see her. We maybe get 6 or 7 Adair chapters in the whole thing, and she is sorely underused, while we are continuing to follow Valin and Caden through their glacially slow-paced plots. And even when, in Valin's chapters, we actually get something interesting happening and he progresses, there is something that progresses, he still somehow manages to revert back to doing the same thing he's been doing for the previous 20 chapters. Like, it's strange that you feel like you're going to move on to something new and then we still are doing the same stuff. And it just feels very slow and a lot of it unnecessary, as so many of these chapters were filled with huge info dumps and then the plot just doesn't really progress in an interesting or in a meaningful way. Then there's a big pet peeve of mine, and this is something Staveley seems to love to do, which is end his chapters with his characters getting knocked out, getting knocked unconscious. Now, this should, and I stress should, add some danger and peril to the world. We would think, well, if people are continually getting the upper hand on our protagonists, surely that makes this world dangerous and feel like it's full of peril and anything could go wrong at any moment. But it actually served to do the opposite, because it's a very cheap device in terms of making a cliffhanger ending of a chapter. So we want to know what, well, you should want to know what is going to continue to happen in the next chapter when they wake up. But actually, this happens so many times that I was never actually scared for the protagonists. The enemies clearly either didn't want to kill them or put them in any serious mortal peril, or if they did, they were just insanely incompetent, or actually 3, the person who knocked them out was actually on their side anyway. And it just has happened multiple times, over and over and over again, and it just undercut the stakes horrifically, in my eyes personally. And then it's a 50 chapter book, and about chapter 27 we get a trope that I'm not going to name because I don't want to spoil anything, but as far as I can tell, much maligned, pretty much universally hated trope that happens in fantasy, particularly from male writers, and it was just unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. Nobody likes this trope. Nobody likes when this happens, and it makes you really feel the hand of the author when things like this happen. It doesn't feel like you're in the story anymore. It doesn't feel like the characters are real anymore, because it feels like such a classically poor use of a trope by the author to try and achieve something. And nobody likes it. Nobody likes it when this happens. Seriously, it's one of these tropes that nobody likes, I promise you. And then we get to the real grimdark part of this, where characters do evil things for the sake of it. And these aren't evil characters. These aren't the baddies. These aren't the guys that you're not meant to like. These are our protagonists and their friends, and they do things that are just categorically evil, and it is then slightly pushed back against by the protagonist, and then they just accept it. And this is like, people are going to say, well, it's grimdark, it's meant to be realistic, but this isn't realistic. To me, grimdark should be grim and dark and gritty and real. This isn't real. People don't just do evil stuff for the sake of it and then no one ever calls them on it. That's not how it works. Not because people are good and wonderful all the time, but because people look out for themselves and they don't like people being terrible and doing evil stuff, because then it's going to come back on you eventually. And this isn't real, this isn't gritty, this isn't how I think grimdark should actually be. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a massive grimdark reader, so maybe this is just something I need to deal with. Maybe this is something for people who are more versed in the genre, makes sense and is totally fine, but for me it just felt unnecessary. It just didn't really feel real. It felt too, I was going to say moustache twirling, but it's not even that, because they're not meant to be the villains. It just feels so out of place in real life with real human people. Yeah, seriously guys, so many things. And now you might think that I hate this book. You might think that at the end of this review I'm going to tell you 1 star. I don't even hate this book. Seriously guys, the world building is really interesting and it's delivered poorly, but the actual world that Brian Staveley has built is really super interesting to me. The characters aren't astounding, but they do get better throughout the book. I actually think the prose gets better throughout the book, which sounds very odd, but I think it actually improves. It gets less repetitive, we get less info dumps. It feels like by the last 10 chapters of the book, he actually trusts me to pick up the things that are inferred, at least mostly. Not always, he still does that a little bit. But it does seem to get better. And actually, once we get to about the 60-70% mark in this book, the plot really picks up and actually interesting things happen and the plot lines start to converge a little bit and it starts to make sense. You can see where he's going. It's not the most astounding ending. There's not like an amazing plot twist. You can see where he's building to as you get there, but that's fine. That means that he's laid the groundwork well, or decently at least. And actually, I really enjoyed the ending and I think it was done really rather well, which means I'm left with a book where the first 60 to 70% I would give 2 stars, maybe 2.5 stars being generous, and the last 30% I would say, if you put that on a good book, would be a 4-star read. Now, can I with a clear conscience tell you that you should slog through the first 70% of this book? Probably not. Probably not. Now, when I have read book 2 and book 3, maybe I will come back and tell you it's worth slogging through. Maybe I will say, yeah, that's just debut writer stuff, debut novel stuff. Actually, it gets better. But personally, the start of this book was really not great. And the ending of this book was really pretty decent. All in all, I would say if you start reading this book and you get maybe 4 or 5 chapters in and you like it, it's only going to get better. Like, it may take a while, but it will get better and it will improve and you'll love it. If, however, you read the first few chapters of this book and it just puts you right off, you're not going to be able to slog through to the 70% mark. Like, I think it's just too bad. So, yeah, I really hope that this series progresses as well as I think and hope it can. I really hope that the writing we get at the end of this book continues throughout the next two, and that this trilogy is worthwhile and worth giving a go. But all in all, I think this book comes out as a 3-star read for me. And now 3-star for me means I enjoyed it, but it's not a great book. And I think that's a fair summation of how I finished with this book. I enjoyed it. I don't think it was particularly good. I am really looking forward to where it's going in book 2 and book 3 though. So hopefully the uptick in quality that I feel happened at the end of this book continues, and actually book 2 is much better, and hopefully book 3 again is a marked improvement, and I can say this is just debut novel, debut writer nerves getting started, and actually there is something really good here for Brian Staveley to dig into. All in all though, 3-star read. I hope that's been interesting and informative. Do tap the like button if you enjoyed this, and if you want to see more of my content, up here is the latest book tag I did. It is based on a Wheel of Time prompt, so go and check that out if you're a Wheel of Time fan, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.